Okay, so this is question 47 and 48. This is from the SAT number 15 reading section. Let's jump in. So question 47 says, the passage suggests that if Seydel had planted wheat or corn on the two agricultural strips in Hartmann's experiment, the percentage of the surface of each strip covered with weeds would likely have been something. So let's sort of jump in here. So the question is basically asking if Seydel, who is the farmer here, mentioned the passage, just to give us some context of what's going on. So basically, he's farming. They're trying to test this hypothesis of plowing at night versus plowing during the day. So basically what they do is it says he cultivates one strip, right, and during the day, and the other he does at night. It says no crops were planted in these pilot experiments to avoid possible competition, right? So it's just the weeds that are there. The results are dramatic. It says that 80% of the surface of the field, so we had 80% of the surface covered in weeds for the one that was done in the day and 2% for the one that was done at night. And that's sort of what he did. So this is saying what would happen if this guy had planted wheat or corn on the two agricultural strips. And what we already just pointed out was that they said there were no crops that were planted in these experiments. So the question is really asking what was likely to happen if he had planted wheat or corn. So there's a couple ways to solve this. We can either sort of go from the front or from the back. I would say let's start with the text, and let's see if we can figure out a text that would answer this best for us, right? So 52 through 55 says, Hartmann tested his idea by plowing the farmer Carl Seydel cultivated one strip repeated threefold at around midday and the other strip at night. This is basically just telling us sort of more of the methodology of the experiment, right? So he's cultivating one strip here at day and the other strip he's doing at night. It doesn't really tell us, though, what the effect of planting wheat or corn would be, and it's hard to even make an inference based on what was said about it. So I don't think it's a very strong answer choice, so we could eliminate that one probably. 55 through 57 says no crops were planted in these pilot experiments to avoid possible competition with the emerging weeds. This one could work pretty good for us because it does tell us about no crops, right? So that would reference the fact that there are would tell us something about maybe what would happen if he did plant wheat or corn on the two agricultural strips. So I would say keep this answer choice for sure. 57 through 58 says the results were dramatic, right? This one is not too strong, although it is referencing this past one about the crops. It is talking about the results being dramatic. I wouldn't want to pass judgment too quickly. It sort of could be our answer choice, right? If we make a connection with it, it might work. I would say let's maybe keep it for now, although it's not as strong as B. 58 through 61 says more than 80% of the surface of the field plowed in daylight was covered by weeds, whereas only 2%. So this is more about results. It's explaining the dramatic part. Again, it's not super strong. It doesn't really reference the other crops in the way that B does, but it could have something to do with our answer choice. If, for example, the correct answer choice has to do with, it's hard to say even in advance, but it's possible that this could be referenced. I would sort of keep it, but discount it a little bit. So that's D. So we look at A, and basically between B, C, and D are our answer choice of 48, but really B is the strongest candidate so far. And in any case, even if C and D do end up being our text, B is the one that tells us directly about why they planted no crops and gives us the best indication of probably what would happen if there were crops planted. So basically it says that no crops were planted because they were trying to avoid possible competition with the emerging weeds. So what this tells us is that they didn't plant the crops because they didn't want the crops and the weeds to be competing. They really wanted to see how the weeds did all on their own to get sort of a very clear picture of what would happen in this experiment. So it's likely that if they did plant crops, there would be competition. And if there is competition, a number of things could happen. But if we look at 47, the first two answer choices are talking about the percentage of weeds. So A says that if you had planted the wheat and the corn, then you would have had a lower percentage, right, than of weeds than what Hartmann found. And if you had planted the wheat and corn, B says that you would have a higher percentage. You would have had more weeds than were already found. So this is kind of interesting. It should make us think about this. And it makes more sense to say that it's likely that you would have a lower percentage, right? Because if the weeds and the crops, if they didn't plant the crops in the weeds because they were afraid that there would be competition and they wanted to see basically how the weeds acted purely on a pure basis, then we could say if there was competition, it's likely that there would be less weeds. So lower than the percentage seems to be plausible, whereas higher than the percentage doesn't. But let's continue and look at the other answer choices, make sure we're on the right track. C says nearly impossible for Hartmann to determine. Even with the qualifier nearly, this is a very strong claim. We should be skeptical of the strong claim. And there's really nothing in the passage or in any of the texts that we looked at that says that if you had planted the wheat and corn, it would be impossible for him to determine how many weeds there were. It also just doesn't make sense. It's hard to imagine a case where this would be true. That would make it impossible for him to determine. He could still count even if there was wheat and corn. Not right. C is sort of like A and B, except it's saying that everything would stay the same, comparable to Hartmann's original projection. Basically, there would be no effect, right, if you had planted the wheat or corn. But it actually does seem to suggest that there would be an effect. There's a reason why they didn't plant the wheat and the corn. So if it was just going to be the same, probably wouldn't be D. So that's going to leave us with answer choice A, which also matches answer choice B the most closely. So we get rid of C and D. And basically what this tells us is that if the crops were grown, then it's likely that you would find less weeds because they would be in competition with each other.